The night was thick with fog as Jake drove along the deserted highway. He had been on the road for hours, the rhythmic hum of his car, the only sound breaking the silence. His eyes were heavy, and the dim light of the dashboard barely illuminated the empty stretch ahead. He had promised himself he wouldn't stop until he reached the motel, but nature had other plans. Suddenly his stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since breakfast. He glanced at the gas gauge and saw it was dipping dangerously low. With no other cars in sight, he decided to pull into a small pit stop that appeared out of nowhere, the flickering neon sign barely visible through the mist. As he parked, he noticed the place looked ancient, as if it had been stuck in time. The sign read pit stop in faded letters, and the windows were dusty, making it hard to see inside. A chill ran down his spine, but hunger drove him forward. Jake stepped out of the car, the cold air hitting him like a wave. He walked towards the entrance, the wooden door creaking ominously as he pushed it open. The inside was dimly lit, with a few flickering bulbs hanging from the ceiling. The smell of stale coffee and something rotten filled the air. Behind the counter stood a thin man with a gaunt face, his eyes sunken and hollow. He looked up as Jake entered, a slow smile spreading across his lips, revealing yellow teeth. "Welcome to the pit stop," he said in a voice that sent shivers down Jake's spine. "Just looking for some food and gas," Jake replied, trying to sound casual. The man nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Jake's face. "We've got some snacks in the back, and I can fill your tank too." Just a moment he shuffled away, leaving Jake standing alone in the eerie silence. Jake glanced around the pit stop. Old photographs lined the walls showing the place in its heyday, bustling with people. Now it felt like a graveyard. He noticed a door at the back slightly ajar, with a flickering light spilling out. Curiosity tugged at him, but he fought it down. "Here you go," the man said, returning with a small bag of chips and a soda. "That'll be $5. Jake handed over the cash, eager to get back on the road. "And the gas." The man gestured toward the side of the building. "Just pull around back, I'll take care of it." Jake nodded and stepped outside, the cold air hitting him again. He walked to his car, his mind racing with thoughts of getting back on the highway. As he drove around to the back, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The man was already there, pumping gas into Jake's car. "Nice ride you got here," he said, still smiling that unsettling smile. "Thanks," Jake replied, trying to keep the conversation light. "Not many folks stop here anymore," the man continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You know, there are stories about this place." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Stories? Yeah, about the last few travelers who came through. They never left." A chill ran down Jake's spine. "What do you mean?" The man leaned in closer, his breath smelling of decay. "They say the fog comes alive at night. It hides things, dark things." Jake's heart raced. "I should get going." Of course," the man said, stepping back. "Just be careful out there." Jake nodded, feeling a wave of unease wash over him. As he drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The man stood there watching, his smile fading into the darkness. The road stretched ahead, but the fog thickened, wrapping around his car like a shroud. Jake turned up the radio, trying to drown out the creeping dread that settled in his gut. But the music did little to ease his anxiety. Minutes passed and the fog grew denser. Suddenly his headlights caught something on the side of the road. A figure stood there, shrouded in mist. Jake slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop. He squinted through the fog, trying to see. The figure was a woman, her hair disheveled, clothes torn. She looked pale, almost ghostly. Jake's heart raced as she approached the car, her face twisted in fear. "Help me," she cried, her voice trembling. "Please, you have to help me." Jake's instincts screamed at him to drive away, but he couldn't just leave her there. He rolled down the window slightly. "What happened?" "They're coming for me," she gasped, looking over her shoulder. "You have to get me out of here." Jake's heart pounded. "Who's coming?" Before she could answer, a low growl echoed through the fog. It sounded unnatural, like a beast lurking just out of sight. The woman's eyes widened in terror. "Please hurry." Jake's mind raced. He couldn't just leave her, but he also felt a deep sense of danger. "Get in," he shouted, unlocking the door. She dove into the passenger seat, slamming the door behind her. Drive, drive, drive. Jake floored the gas pedal, the tires screeching against the pavement. The fog swirled around them, becoming thicker, almost alive. He glanced at the woman, her face pale and terrified. "What's going on?" "They're hunting me," she cried, her voice shaking. "I don't know what they are, but they won't stop until they find me." Jake's grip tightened on the wheel as he pushed the car faster. The road ahead twisted and turned, the fog closing in. He could hear the growling now echoing around them, a sound that sent chills down his spine. Suddenly the car jerked violently, and Jake struggled to keep control. "What the hell was that?" he shouted. "They're trying to stop us," the woman screamed. Jake glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. Shadows moved in the fog, dark shapes darting in and out of sight. He could feel their eyes on him, hungry and predatory. "Keep going," she urged, her voice frantic. He pressed down harder on the accelerator, the car roaring forward. But the shadows were closing in, surrounding them. Jake could feel the panic rising in his chest. "Where do I go?" he yelled, desperation creeping into his voice. "Just keep driving, we have to get away." The growling grew louder, a chorus of voices that echoed in the night. Jake's heart raced as he swerved around a bend, the headlights illuminating a fork in the road. "Left or right?" he shouted. "Right. Go right." He turned sharply, the tires screeching against the asphalt. The fog thickened even more, wrapping around them like a suffocating blanket. The growls turned into howls echoing through the night. Jake's mind raced. He had to find a way out. He spotted a sign up ahead, but the words were blurred by the fog. "What does it say?" he asked, squinting to see. "I don't know." "Just keep going." The car jolted again, and Jake felt a sharp pain in his chest as something slammed against the side. What was that? "They're here," she screamed, her eyes wide with terror. Jake slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop. The fog swirled around them, and he could see shapes moving in the mist, dark figures closing in. "Get out. We have to run," the woman shouted, throwing open the door. Jake hesitated, fear gripping him. "What about the car?" "Forget the car. They'll find us." With a surge of adrenaline, he followed her into the thick fog. They stumbled through the darkness, the howls echoing around them. Jake could feel the ground beneath him shifting, almost alive. "Where do we go?" he gasped, trying to keep up. "Just keep moving," she cried, her voice barely audible over the chaos. They ran blindly, the fog closing in around them. Jake could hear the growls getting closer, the shadows darting just out of reach. Panic surged through him as he felt something brush against his leg. "Keep going," the woman shouted, her voice filled with urgency. Jake pushed forward, his lungs burning. Suddenly they broke through the fog into a clearing. In the center stood an old, decrepit building, its windows shattered and walls crumbling. "Inside," she yelled, pointing. They rushed to the door, slamming it shut behind them. The inside was dark, the air thick with dust. Jake's heart raced as they leaned against the door, trying to catch their breath. "What was that?" he panted, looking around. "I don't know," she replied, her voice trembling. "But we have to hide." They moved deeper into the building, the darkness swallowing them whole. The air was cold, and Jake could feel the weight of something oppressive pressing down on them. "Do you have a phone?" he asked, pulling out his own. She shook her head. "No signal. We're trapped." Panic flooded Jake's mind. "What do we do?" "We wait," she whispered. They found a small room in the back and huddled together, listening to the howls outside. The shadows danced just beyond the door, their growls echoing through the walls. Hours passed, or maybe just minutes. Time felt distorted in the darkness. Jake's heart raced as he heard something scrape against the door. "What was that?" he whispered, fear creeping into his voice. "I don't know," she replied, her eyes wide with terror. The scraping grew louder, a low growl vibrating through the walls. Jake's breath quickened as he realized they were not alone. Suddenly the door burst open and a figure lunged into the room. Jake and the woman screamed, backing away against the wall. It was the man from the pit stop, his eyes wild and manic. "You shouldn't have come here," he shouted, his voice echoing in the darkness. "Get away from us," Jake yelled, instinctively stepping in front of the woman. But the man only laughed, a haunting sound that sent chills down Jake's spine. "You think you can escape? They'll find you." The shadows swirled around them, the growls intensifying. Jake felt a surge of anger. "What do you want?" The man grinned, his teeth glinting in the darkness. "I want you to understand. You're already part of it." Before Jake could respond, the shadow surged forward, engulfing the man. He screamed, a sound that echoed through the room before abruptly cutting off. Jake's heart raced as he turned to the woman. "We have to go." They bolted from the room, the fog swirling around them. The howls grew louder, a cacophony of voices that filled the air. They stumbled through the darkness, desperate to find a way out. Suddenly they burst through the door and into the night. The fog was thicker than ever, wrapping around them like a suffocating blanket. "Which way?" Jake shouted, panic rising in his chest. "Just run," she cried, her voice filled with urgency. They sprinted through the fog, the howls echoing around them. Jake could feel the shadows closing in, their presence heavy and oppressive. "Keep going," she urged, her breath coming in ragged gasps. They ran blindly, the fog swallowing them whole. Jake's heart raced as he felt something brush against his leg again. He glanced down, but there was nothing there. "Faster," she shouted, pulling him forward. They stumbled into another clearing and Jake's heart sank. The pit stop loomed ahead, its neon sign flickering ominously. "No, not back there," he yelled, panic rising in his chest. But the woman was already moving toward it, her face pale with fear. "We have to go inside." Jake hesitated, but the howls grew louder, echoing around them. With no other choice, he followed her into the pit stop. The man was gone, but the air felt heavy, charged with something dark. They moved through the dimly lit space, the shadows dancing around them. "Where do we go?" Jake whispered, fear creeping into his voice. "Find a way out," she urged, her eyes wide with terror. They searched the pit stop, but every door led to darkness. The howls grew louder, echoing through the walls. Suddenly, the lights flickered and the shadows surged forward, engulfing them. Jake felt a cold hand wrap around his wrist, pulling him into the darkness. Help, he screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the fog. He struggled against the grip, but it was too strong. The shadows closed in around him, their growls echoing in his ears. Jake, the woman, cried, reaching for him, but it was too late. The darkness consumed him, pulling him into the void. Jake awoke in a cold sweat, gasping for breath. He was back in his car, the engine still running. The fog had lifted, and the road was clear. "What just happened?" he muttered, shaking his head. He glanced around, his heart racing. Everything seemed normal, but the memory of the pit stop lingered in his mind. Shaking off the feeling, he decided to keep driving. He had to get out of there. As he sped down the highway, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching him. The shadows danced in the corners of his vision, and the howls echoed in his mind. He reached for his phone, but there was still no signal. Panic surged through him as he realized he was still trapped. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the side of the road. Jake's heart dropped as he recognized the woman from before. "Help me," she cried, her voice filled with desperation. Jake slammed on the brakes, his heart racing. "No, I can't do this again." But she was already at his window, her face pale and terrified. "Please, they're coming." Jake's instinct screamed at him to drive away, but he couldn't just leave her there. "Get in," he shouted, unlocking the door. She dove into the passenger seat, slamming the door behind her. "Drive, they're coming." Jake floored the gas pedal, the car roaring down the highway. The shadows swirled around them, the howls echoing in the night. As they sped into the fog, he realized there was no escape. The pit stop was just the beginning, and the darkness would always follow.